Hey there, it's Ann Treese, and welcome to the Savvy Painter podcast. Rebecca Crowell is my guest today. Rebecca creates luscious abstract paintings, which are inspired by her travels and memories of places she's been. In this episode, Rebecca and I talk about working with cold wax and how playing with that medium encouraged her to switch from representational to abstract painting. That leads us into the discussion of the discomfort that artists feel sometimes when they are transitioning from a style they are known for into something that is completely new. Because I know artists do have lives outside of the studio, I asked Rebecca to share what it was like when she and her husband started their family. She talks candidly about her challenges with raising her sons while keeping up with her painting. I really appreciate Rebecca's curiosity and love of creating. Although she might be most known for her cold wax paintings, she also makes monoprints, and she's learning about carborundum painting, a technique I have to admit I was completely unfamiliar with. So I asked her all about it. We dig into her process of painting and how she conceives of a body of work that she might create after experiencing a place through her travels. Rebecca is currently in the middle of a crowdsourcing campaign for Cold Wax Medium, Techniques, Concepts, and Conversations, a book she co-authored with artist Jerry McLaughlin. The fundraising campaign reached its goal quickly, which I can tell you is not a small feat. And they still have a few weeks to go. The campaign ends on August 17th, 2016. Just want to mention that in case you're not listening to this in real time. So I asked her a couple questions about her campaign. That's a topic I love to talk about because I had so much fun when I did my Kickstarter campaign for a painting project I did a few years ago. Now, before we get started, I just want to thank Leslie for bringing Rebecca to my attention. I love what Rebecca is doing, so thank you so much, Leslie. Okay, here is Rebecca Crowell. Rebecca, thank you so much for being on the Savvy Painter podcast. I am delighted to have you with us today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
I would love to hear a little bit about your background as an artist and kind of specifically what drives you to create.
Sure. Yeah, as a background, I was always involved in art from childhood, but there were certain things along the way that helped point the way, and I had a mentor in junior high school. My art teacher there was somebody that I knew personally because I was friends with her daughter, and I would go to her house and see her working on her own projects, and that was the first real artist that I knew, and I found that inspiring. And early on, as a child, I met the sculptor Genevieve Hamlin, who was a friend of my grandmother's, and it made a huge impression on me because I saw someone that was living the life of an artist and very happy. And, I was so struck by that. So, I had these little pointers when I was a child that said to me, this is a career. This is something that you could do. I kind of lost sight of it a little bit, I'd say in my 20s, but at some point I had a semester of art school, and then I dropped out of that and kind of was a little lost for a few years, as a lot of people are at that age, and then decided to re-enter a degree program and get my Bachelor of Fine Arts. And from there, it was sort of full speed ahead, and I went on and got my master's, and then just started in with the galleries, and I did some adjunct teaching. And another point that was a decision for me along the way was that I had been doing adjunct teaching at the university for, I think it was 7 or 8 years, and I realized how much energy that was taking, and I was starting to sell my work at that point, and I thought, I could actually not be doing this very time-consuming and not very well-paying job, and do more work, do more paintings, and enter the gallery situation and all of that. So that was another point that helped me just see where I was going with it.
Do you remember at all, like making kind of how you were feeling when you were weighing that decision?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little. I remember the day that I went in to tell the administrator at the university that no, I didn't want to take on any more classes, and yeah, it was I had to gather up my courage and believe that, okay, this is going to work out. And it felt like a leap. Mm-hmm. And it was, but I'm really happy that I did that, because I think that really was a turning point. And, as far as what drives me overall, it's I don't know, it's just my life. It's just what I do. And I travel quite a bit, which is a source of ideas for my work. And I don't know, it just has to do with processing life and taking in and processing what my experiences are.
You travel a lot you do workshops. I saw this because I'm obsessed with Ireland and really want to go there. So that right away I went, bing.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Just for my own curiosity, I would love to hear about it.
I started out doing a couple of residencies, artist in residence programs in Spain, and this was in 2001 and 2008. And then followed that with a couple in Ireland. And now I do return to Ireland for teaching every year to the same location. But I've been to these residencies at a number of places. I also went to one in Sweden. And they're just amazing situations where an artist can go for a period of time. Usually the minimum is about 2 weeks, but sometimes it goes on for months, and you just have that time to work and be with other artists who may be there as part of the program and explore where you are. And it's been a huge source of ideas for my work. It's just kind of the idea of responding to the place where I am.
This is a question that I get often, and I've only done 1 or 2 residencies, so I don't know that I'm the person to answer it. But so since you've seemed like you've done a lot, I'll ask you. So 2 questions, and I'll remember to ask you again if you forget while you're answering the first one.
Okay. Okay.
But I'm curious, how do you select the residencies, sort of vet them out? And then the other question is, how do you balance that with your family life? I mean, I know your son is grown now, but taking off for a couple of weeks or a month.
Sure. And that second question is one that oftentimes when I am talking to artists, that's a stumbling block for people. And it's either that they have children still at home, or maybe they're also at a later stage in life responsible for a parent or something like that. So in my case, the first one I went to, I have 2 sons, and I think they were 11 and 14 the first time I went. But I have a very supportive family, and it was actually my older son that encouraged me when I first got the letter inviting me to come. He said, "Mom, you have to do that." And I always remember that because it was so supportive. And so I realize it's hard if you don't have a situation that it can work for you. But as far as finding them or figuring out where to go, I know of at least one good website. It's called ArtRes. Oh, no, I'm forgetting.
Well, I can link to it in the show notes.
Okay. Anyway, it describes these residencies from all over the world. And for me, the way that I got started was actually I was approached by the one that I went to in Spain and invited to apply based on work that the director had seen somewhere. But in choosing them for myself, I choose locations that are remote or rugged, because that's a kind of landscape that inspires me. And I think narrowing down a decision would come from where you as an artist feel what you feel you would respond to. And it might, in some cases, be a city, and there's residencies in major cities around the world. It could be a remote place like I prefer. It could be all kinds of things. There's a lot of variety in what's out there. It's a good idea to contact a few people that have done the residency, and they'll almost always list it on a website and say, what was your experience? There probably are some, and I've heard of some that are not as well run as others. And you want somewhere where you are going to have a nice studio, or at least adequate studio, and somewhere that gives you the kind of support that you need in order to go.
Mm-hmm. For you personally, what were some of the biggest takeaways or the biggest benefits of going there for your personal growth as an artist?
I think it's the focus. It's an amazing feeling to wake up in the morning at a residency and realize you have no obligations throughout the day. They have nothing to do that you normally do in your life as far as taking care of business and all that. I mean, yeah, you have to find some food maybe or whatever, but you're basically going to spend the day in your studio or out exploring. And this goes on for weeks. And so it's a very expansive situation. Another wonderful benefit, depending on the residency, is that you may get to know other artists from around the world who are there at the same time. And that can vary a lot. Sometimes there's only a few people there at once, or even you might even be the only one. Other times there might be quite a few people there. And so I think those two things are really what's special about them.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit about your work and your process? You do cold wax, and as I kind of mentioned to you, I was going to ask you this because I haven't really had anybody on the show yet that works in cold wax. And so tell me how you start off a piece, for example. What's your process?
Okay, sure. Yeah, and basically what cold wax medium is, it's kind of a consistency of a thick paste made of beeswax and some types of solvent and usually a drying agent. And so it's sometimes confused with encaustic, but it's a very different process because in encaustic you have to use a heat source to fuse layers, etc. And cold wax is just a medium that you add to your oil paint. Mm-hmm. And so you mix it up with each color on the palette, and then there's all kinds of ways to use it. I mean, the way that I work is to build up layers on a panel I don't use brushes very much, mostly palette knife, brayers, squeegees, and building it up in fairly thin layers. The cold wax medium allows the oil to dry and set up quicker than normal oil paint does, and so it enables certain techniques and things that you wouldn't be able to do with regular oil paint. I do a lot of digging and scraping and solvent reductions, where I put solvent on the surface and it eats away through the layers. You can put additives into the mixture if you want to for more texture, like marble dust or sand or different things like that. And the layers really create a beautiful effect of separating color, and there's a transparency that is part of the wax. The more wax you add, the more transparent the paint will be. So it opens up a lot of techniques that are very exciting.
Yeah.
And so that's how I started working with it it's about 15 years ago now, and I just started experimenting, and something about this medium just invites people to experiment, and so I started developing techniques, and then at some point started teaching workshops.
And do you so I played with it like kind of half-heartedly once. That's my experience.
Don't stop there.
Well, I was kind of like, this is really neat. Like I loved how matte it was. Like that was the thing that I noticed right away.
Yes,
I'm like,
that's
wow,
another
so
thing,
cool.
Right? It has a very matte surface, and if you don't like that matte surface, there are things you can do to create a shine, but I prefer it myself.
Yeah, I loved that matte surface, but do you have to work on a hard surface in order for it to last, or are there any what's your surface that you work on? I'm going to grill you about this, Rebecca.
Yeah, I use a wood panel or paper. You can use it on canvas if you don't work very thickly, if you work very thin, or if there are additives that you can put in with it that will make the paint film more flexible. As it is, cold wax medium and oil, when it dries, is not flexible. It's pretty brittle. So that's why typically people use a wooden panel.
Okay. And when you were describing your process of doing these layers, you mentioned that cold wax does kind of dry or set up quicker than normal oil paints, but are you allowing layers to dry completely before you add another one on top, or do you need to do that? Or
no, actually, at different points in a painting, I'll add, well, especially starting out, I'll start out with 3 or 4 layers, one over the next, because there's the cold wax adds a body to the paint that allows you to smooth it on. Sometimes I say it's like icing a cake. You can, with a certain angle or pressure, you can build up several layers at once. There are other points during the process where it helps to let it set up, but my favorite point to work on the painting is when it's semi-dry, when it's still a little bit tacky, and at that point it's receptive to some interesting things like monoprinting onto the surface, or drawing onto the surface with soft pastel, charcoal. So
wow.
That particular stage of things is one of my favorites.
Nice. That sounds fun.
It's really fun.
It's not a problem, but one of the things about doing these interviews is now I'm like, oh my God, I got to get that.
That's right, yeah.
I think I still have some in my studio.
Well, good, and it keeps a long time. So, yeah. And one of the things I found when I started using it was that I was at a point in my work where I was transitioning into abstraction from a more representational background, and I'd played around with abstraction over the years, but I hadn't really hit on it. I hadn't quite gotten it to work for me. And when I started using the cold wax medium, there was something about the techniques that I started playing around with that opened that up for me, because the textures and the color depth were coming out of the process itself, and I wasn't I didn't feel like I had to render things like texture. They were just happening. And it really just was a good alignment for me of what I wanted in my work and what this medium was offering to me.
I love that it was sort of the medium that sort of inspired you to take that dive, or to make that shift. Because I think a lot of artists that I talk to, if you're sort of in your, like, the beginning, it's an interesting progression, I think, being an artist, that at the beginning you're open to trying anything and everything, and you're just playing and kind of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and it's kind of a really nice place to be in, because you're so open to experimentation, and then you sort of like find the thing that you want to do, and you get very skilled at that. But that sort of takes away the desire, I think, sometimes, or there's a fear of making a big jump, like from representation to abstraction, because that's your thing and you're not supposed to change.
Yeah, there's definite pitfalls, and along the way of, like you say, if you're known for something, if you're comfortable with something, it's a challenge to make the change. But I think most artists feel that impulse for growth and change, and it's a lifelong process. Yeah.
Did you find yourself resisting that at all when you first were, or did you just go, oh my God, this is great, I want to do it?
No, I'd actually been very interested in abstraction for a long time, but I couldn't seem to find my voice in it. And as you say, trying different things, experimenting, nothing was really taking. And I mean, I do have some paintings from the time before I started using cold wax that I can see were precursors to what I ended up doing with it. But I was fighting the medium a little bit with just straight oil paint. And once I felt that the media that I was using was so aligned with what I wanted it to say. It was a good fit.
Yeah, your work is just so. I mean, I can't wait to see it in person because I'm looking at it on the internet and I'm going like, oh my God, that just looks so, luscious and textured, and you kind of just want to like put your nose up to it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it is a little hard to photograph it to show what it really looks like if you had your nose up to it, because there's a lot of intricacy in the surface that comes about from the process that I use.
Yeah. You are in the middle of a campaign for a book you've written.
Right.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, sure. So yes, it's been quite an amazing campaign and quite an amazing process to create the book. And I have a wonderful co-author, Jerry McLaughlin, who approached me about a year and a half ago and said that he felt there was a need for a comprehensive book about cold wax medium. So I was a little reluctant because I never wanted to put the time into doing something like that, and I have enough going on, So, but he was he's a very focused and persuasive person, and he had very good ideas. And when we met and talked about it, what was really appealing to me about where we were in agreement was that it would not just be a book about technique, and we wanted it to be about, well, kind of what I was just talking about with my own work, where there's an alignment of, well, in art speak, like form and content. Why are you using this particular medium? What is it saying for you, and what do you want it to say? And so we wanted the book to have that kind of content and conversation in it. And that made me excited about it. I wasn't all that excited about describing techniques, but that aspect of it really pulled me in. And so it's been a lot of work put into it. And so we initially thought we would just do it sort of print on demand kind of book, and I think not realizing the actual demand that was out there. And a print on demand book typically doesn't have, fine art quality to it. So eventually we thought, no, this book, we have ended up having artwork from around the world in it. We have many artists in the book that have contributed work. And so we thought, no, we really have to respect this and do a regular print run on it, but that was super expensive. So we decided to run a crowdfunding campaign, and it's been amazing. We're over our mark, and we're going to use extra money to just help with distribution and print numbers and things like that. But the response has been incredible, and the campaign is still running, and there are still perks available, mainly now at the patron level, which is the level at which you would have your name put into the book as a acknowledged sponsor of the book and our project. And many people have bought the pre-release copies, and so it's really been overwhelming how fast it went already. And,
yeah.
I mean, it's been great. But I think, just knowing that so many people are excited about it and very eager to get the book.
Yeah. How did you, so there's so many I did a crowdfunding campaign, and I used Kickstarter for that. So how did you decide on the venue that you chose?
We chose Indiegogo, and honestly, Jerry, my co-author, did the research on that and said, this is the one we want. So I said, sure, which is, there's been a lot of business decisions and things that he's really done the research on and taken the lead on, and that was one of them. And so I've been really happy with it. And of course, we had to, we promoted it on Facebook, and another really, smart thing that Jerry initiated was to have a landing page for the book that's been in place for a number of months. And so people joined a mailing list there so that they would know the progress of the book. And so everybody got an email, and actually 2 emails about the crowdfunding campaign ahead of time. And that, and I publicized it in my newsletter and a few other places, so Facebook page. And so that really helped a lot. I mean, you have to get the word out there somehow.
Yeah, that's usually the toughest part about it.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, because it's just, you need it to kind of hit critical mass, and you guys hit that very quickly.
You have to have all the parts in place, and that takes a lot of forethought, I think, to think, what will lead to another thing. And, bottom line is something that people want. People want to support it and feel that they're getting something out of helping you.
Yes. Yeah. And, I mean, that was an important point, I think. For me at least, I think 90% of the work that went into my own campaign was done before the campaign launched.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to lay the groundwork for sure.
How did you, so you said how many artists do you have in the book, and how did you kind of go about getting the word out and making the selection?
There's close to 100 artists in there. So initially there was, there's different ways we tried to get the word out. Through Facebook, there's a online discussion forum site that I started for people using cold wax, so we posted it on there, and some workshop rosters of mine, things like that. The actual selection of people was something I stepped away from because I just have too many friends in the cold wax world. Now, there's no such thing as too many, but I would have felt very awkward rejecting or making decisions about people that I've worked with in my classes and so on. So one of the first things that I said to Jerry when we talked about writing the book was, that's something I need to hand over to you. And that it was actually something that had gotten in the way of me considering doing it on my own. So he made the actual choices of who would be in, and for the most part, which pieces of theirs. I had a little bit of input on that, but and so the variety is amazing, though, and I think that's one of the real strengths of the book, because it's something I learned, and we did some probing on websites and keeping our eyes and ears open for people using cold wax. And so there are lots of different approaches in the book, from realism and surrealism and to pure abstraction and everything in between. And there's collage, and there's a chapter about experimental approaches, and some printmaking ideas. And I mean, it's just very broad in scope. And that was a delightful surprise to realize what's going on out there.
Yeah, that would be amazing too, because you see how far you can push the medium. And I'm sure you probably saw things that you didn't expect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've been saying I'm learning a lot from my own book. Honestly, I mean, it's opened up some technique ideas for me, and it's just inspiring to see what people are doing.
Yeah, I love that. That's so cool. So your campaign runs, I think, do I remember correctly? It's like August 17th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's still ongoing. And, the categories that are still open, as I mentioned, are the patron level, which is $200, and you get an autographed copy of the book, and you get your name in the book, and then some note cards as well. And then there's a few, there's note cards left, and of course anyone can donate anything just outright that they would feel moved to do. So it's www.coldwaxbook.com.
Very easy to remember. Smart
It
to
is.
get that. I'm curious, was there a moment or a decision you made in your career that you feel was a personal success for you, whether or not it was, generated exposure or was financially rewarded, but something that you're very proud of?
Nothing is coming to mind. Let me just think for a second. Well, I guess overall I would say that I am pleased to have been working with the gallery system for years. And so sometimes there's a feeling, I think a growing feeling, that artists want to take their careers into their own hands, and I understand that. And I think it's become harder to get into galleries these days and to make that, to have that entry point. I can say that over the course of my years working with different galleries, there have been some really wonderful exhibits. There's been some wonderful commissions that have happened. And I guess if I were to point to one that really was rewarding and a challenge and a good one for me, was that I was invited to paint a series of large works for the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, for one of their new research buildings. And it was the whole process was very interesting and rewarding to pull it off. And they hang there now, and I've seen a photo of it, and it feels good to have done that.
Have you ever been able to go visit it?
I have not. It's kind of something I'd love to do.
Yeah. What do you feel like was the most challenging part of that? That sounds like it was an enormous project.
The most challenging part of it was that they gave me some images that they wanted me to base the new work on, and they were older paintings. Some of them were not that old, and some were several years old. And I remember one of them was only 12 by 12 inches, and the paintings that I was doing were more like, I think they were 4 by 3 feet or 4.5 by 3 feet or something, so quite a bit larger. And so that was interesting to take something like that small and conceive it as a much larger painting. And I think there was a technical challenge just in being able to come very close, actually, I felt, to the appearance of the work from several years ago. And I think it made me realize that I have a lot of technical mastery or control over what I'm doing. And believe me, when you're learning cold wax medium, you may think that it's sort of a lot of happy accidents, but the more you work with it, the more you realize you know how you got there. You start to learn to really control it, and that's what I had to do in order to come up with those pieces. And so it was a really interesting process.
Wow, that sounds like it. It sounds amazing. Yeah, because just I'm just thinking about, like, if I had to take a small painting that was several years old and then kind of try to get myself back to that space and then enlarge it to that extent. And plus you've during that time, you've built up more skill levels. And so
and so what I noticed a lot was that I got to where I wanted to be much more directly than I had with the original piece. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I could look at the piece and say, oh, okay, I know how to do that, and I'm going to do it.
Oh, that's so funny.
But it's kind of it was a good feeling to know that, yes, I could do that. And I enjoyed it. I mean, it was not, I think the fact that it was on such a different scale and that it would be such a public installation was really motivating to me.
Yeah, yeah. And plus it brings that, it's not like just repeating what you'd already done. It brings new challenges.
Yeah.
Can you share a story of a time in your journey when you encountered a setback? And most importantly, what did you take away from that experience?
Well, as I mentioned, I do have 2 children, and I think any artist who goes through those early childhood years while trying to pursue their work will relate to this.
It's a huge topic.
It is a huge topic, and I think it's a good one to talk about because, there still are some old stereotypes or whatever saying you can't do both, and I would say that's not true. You can, but it does help to have a supportive spouse and a supportive family. But even with that, I'd say those early years were very difficult. I had my children shortly after I got out of graduate school, and began a rather challenging time.
Yeah, you're just starting out on all levels.
Right. I had just launched, and most of the people I knew were going on to teaching at universities, or maybe they were going to move to New York or something. And we live in rural Wisconsin, and while we had relocated to Arizona for the grad school time, we were coming back to our place. And so it was a rather strange time for me, but I was very eager to have kids. I always wanted them, and it was a very planned and important part of my life. So but the early years were challenging, and I just really did everything I could to keep it going and to spend time in the studio in the evenings, or when they were old enough to go to daycare for 15 or 20 hours a week. That's what I did. And I remember that it was hard to come back after dropping them off and not just lie down and take a nap. Okay, to the studio. But anyway, after a number of years of that, when they were small, and they're 3 years apart, so it went on for a while, I really did get to a pretty discouraged point in my feelings about my work and about having any sort of career. And I remember that there was a local exhibit at the library in the town near where I live, and I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll put in a couple pieces. It was like my last hurrah or something. Mm-hmm. And that was a turning point for me, because the juror of the show owned a gallery in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and she loved my work that I had submitted, and she gave me the Best of Show award, and she purchased one of the pieces herself, and she invited me into her gallery, and that was all like everything turned, in wow. that one thing that happened. And so then she began to sell my work, and that was really what gave me the confidence to keep going.
Wow, that's so great. I mean, sometimes it just takes that one person to give you that little nudge that you need.
Yep. And when and I had some encouraging friends and other things going on in my life that told me to keep going. But I remember I was at a point where I was considering putting all my art supplies on Craigslist or something. It's like shutting up business, and that's it for me. And I need a real job and that kind of thing. And pretty glad I didn't do that.
Yeah, I am too. Well, I kind of want to ask you what your dream project is, but in a way I kind of feel like you're already doing it. But
well, I guess if, and I know there's always something that's a little out of reach, I'm sure. And then I would love to do really huge work. I mean, it seems like the bigger pieces I'm working on now are really exciting to me. And I would love to have a museum show and do some 20-foot paintings or something. I mean, that would be a dream for me.
What is the largest size that you've worked on?
I think it's 5 by 6 feet.
Yeah, that's pretty substantial. I think mine's probably around 4 to 5 feet too. Yeah, I'm curious, like what 20 feet.
Yeah.
I'm like thinking about that.
Well, and if you go into some museums and see these really large abstract work, and it's so moving to me to see those and just feel in the presence of something so huge. And, you know, of course, bigger isn't always better, but just by the fact of being bigger, but I think it presents an opportunity to do something that really envelops the viewer completely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a completely different experience, and sometimes just that. I'm just thinking, you know, of several museum experiences I've had where you're walking in and
Yes.
you know, I know clearly they do this on purpose, but you know, you see it all the way across.
Yes.
It's at the far end of like three
Right.
rooms that you have to walk through, and you're just like, oh, you're just kind of like pulled into it.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. And that's just sort of an ultimate experience with a painting, I think. So I guess that would be amazing to be able to do something like that.
Yeah. Huge challenge and lots of fun.
Yep.
If you could own a piece of art by any living artist, what would it be or whose?
I really like, I just experienced, we were just talking about big paintings. I just experienced seeing a really large Mark Bradford painting.
He's the one who does the collage, is that right?
Yes, it was incredibly complex. It was at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, and it knocked me out. I'd seen his work only online, and it doesn't convey the scale of it or the complexity of it. And so I guess he's kind of a current favorite right now. Sure, I'll take a Mark Bradford, sure.
I know it sounds kind of crazy sometimes. It's like, yeah, and then just you can't help but start thinking about like having that in your house and looking at every single day.
It would be incredible. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I have to move all my furniture out, but you know.
But it'd be worth it. Do you have a habit that you feel like contributes to your success, something that you do sort of either on a daily or weekly basis?
I guess a personality characteristic or something. I'm very persistent, and I guess I've been called driven. You know, I'm not sure that's a good thing or not, but I feel compelled, you know, and I think that keeps me going and keeps me going to the studio, and also keeps me going on a particular painting until I'm truly satisfied, and I'm more than satisfied. I will get to a point in a painting where I look at it and I say, you know, that's a pretty good painting. That's a good painting. And then I'll leave it and I'll come back the next day and I'll think, well, pretty good. That's not what I want. I want really good. I want excellent. And so I'll just dive into it again. And sometimes it really changes at that point. And I can kick myself and say, well, I mean, you go through these cycles of thinking you totally wreck something, and then it emerges again in a better form. And I think that willingness or ability to keep pushing on things is key for anybody, to not be satisfied with, well, okay, I guess that's good enough, because that pretty much stalls you. And especially with working in cold wax medium, there's one of the wonderful things about it is that you can keep painting over it and keep changing it. So that's what happens until I'm very happy.
That's interesting. One of my favorite takeaways from a residency I did was the director said, you know, you have to be willing to commit suicide in a painting. You know, you have to be willing to take those risks that maybe it's not going to turn out. So you know, like, not be so timid in your work. But listening to what you're talking about, and I'm going to ask you this because it's something that I struggle with sometimes, is that, so yeah, not being satisfied and striving for excellence versus perfection, and how that can sometimes paralyze you. How do you balance that?
Well, I know. And when I was thinking about how to describe my own personal attitude, it is sort of a perfectionist attitude. And so I think I'm kind of like that, but I don't feel particularly paralyzed, and I'm not sure. I think it's because I just bring each painting to the point where there's nothing I want to change about it, and I guess that's a certain amount of experience with the work and saying that's what I want. I hit it, and then knowing, well, then there's all these other paintings that are about to happen after this one. It doesn't have to all happen in one painting, but if I've hit it in that painting, then I'm fine with it. I feel good about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
it's kind of a tricky one.
It is
kind
a tricky
line to walk.
It's a tricky one. It's a fine line, or kind of vaporous. But I would describe it as, striving for excellence. Maybe is. You like you said, what you want to achieve in the painting, and you're not going to be satisfied until you get that.
Right. And I think, one of the things I talk about a lot in the classes that I teach is about intention, and I don't mean necessarily specific ideas when I talk about that, but it is about knowing what's important in your work, what's important to you as an artist, and this could be pretty general, really. And then, we're actually writing it down and actually trying to integrate it into your thought and your process. And I find that very powerful.
Do you journal?
Yes, I do. Yeah. And I also, I made a list of intentions like that years ago, and years later came across it, and I thought, wow, actually, this set me on a track, and I've been on this track. And it wasn't that it had to be consciously in my head all the time, because I pretty much did it. And, I referred to it off and on for a while, and then it kind of got buried among other things. And then when I rediscovered it, I thought, I'm still working on these things. And it's a guiding thing. And I think it helps if you can figure out what are those things that you want in your work, and then it helps you know when you're really going off on some kind of tangent that maybe isn't what you want, but keeps you more focused, I think.
Yeah, that focused and clarity of knowing precisely what it is that you want, as opposed to just waking up and going into your studio and hoping that just being present and moving a brush around is enough to make your career.
And it's really, it plays into so many things, and including when are you finished? When are you done? Well, if what you've done aligns with your intentions and meets your expectations and etc., then you're done.
This might be a weird question to ask, but how do you sort of celebrate your own achievements and your own work? Like, how do you say, like, Rebecca, you did a great job? Do you do that?
Oh, I'm very low key about this. I guess, I just keep moving. I don't know. I know when I see my work hung in an exhibit, and I always know there's this moment when I come to the gallery and they've hung my work and I walk in, it just hits me that, oh my, I did this, Yeah. There's always a kind of an astonishment there. That is something, I think that's the moment when I really appreciate what I've done. But I don't think about it a lot when I'm in the studio. It's just like stuff piling up, and I don't know.
I think that's the one amazingly beautiful thing about having a gallery show, is that it's kind of like you get to see your work all dressed up and, presentable, like it's not...
Absolutely. And not only that, but you see it as a body of work. And one of the most interesting things, I think, is to try to find time when you can go in alone or very few people around and just look at all the work and see, well, what connections are there? What directions do you see? Kind of, just stepping back and looking at it as a body of work and doing your own analysis or critique, and then I would write something to myself and make notes. And I think that's, really wonderful benefit of being able to do that. And that can happen no matter where you have an exhibit. It doesn't have to be in a commercial gallery or anything. It could be wherever you're able to hang your work, but just to be able to see it as a whole.
Yeah. I think it's you see things that you just would not see when it's piled up in your studio.
Absolutely.
Have you ever seen anything in there that surprised you?
In my work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I might see, I don't know, the last exhibit I had was at Thomas Dean's Fine Art in Atlanta, and I was showing with the artist Jerry Ledbetter, who, it was a two-person show, and her line is very prominent in her work. And I think it wasn't only seeing my own work, but seeing it in relation to hers. I started seeing how important the lines were in my work, and I'd started using line, but more in the last year before the show, but I remember starting to look at each piece and seeing how the line was functioning in each one, and that was something that kind of, I noticed that.
Yeah, I mean, you see things that you just wouldn't see otherwise, and I guess that's kind of, and walking in and seeing your work and that, having that quiet moment that you described, I think, that's kind of like, in a way, I guess maybe what I was thinking of, like, do you celebrate the fact that, like, I did this, Yeah,
I do a little happy dance in my brain maybe, but I'm just kind of low key about it. I don't know. It's just kind of, I mean, it's this kind of life. I mean, it just goes on, and I'm already thinking about the next thing or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but I think it is hard to take it in what it is and what it looks like to other people and what other people get from it. And it's one of the harder things I find as an artist to really appreciate my own work, even though I love my own work. But I mean, to see it as someone else would. Yeah. It's very hard. Yeah.
It is. So can you describe what your process is when you're making a body of work?
Sure. Sometimes I work with an intentional direction. For example, if I've been in Ireland, I would just know inside that the work was going to be about Ireland, because I bring all these ideas back with me when I come home. And so I look for connections that way when I work in terms of idea behind the work. If I'm preparing for a show, sometimes an exhibit is just sort of a slice of life, like, an exhibit opportunity opens up and I'll pull together what I think will look good together. But when I have time to really prepare, it's liable to be a little more thematic, and especially concerning different places where I've been and locations, because even though my work is abstract, it is always goes back to the experience of being in nature and being in landscape. So I don't. I work in more or less a loose kind of series. Sometimes my series are more defined or intentional. So I think that process, basically, I'm just painting as I always paint, but with more of a theme in mind, usually.
So you visit certain places, and I'm sure memory plays into this. Like, there's certain images, speaking for myself, that I just can't get out of my head and that I want to paint.
Exactly. Well, it really is about memory. And when I'm in a place, I take photographs, but I take them because I like to take photographs, not because I'm going to paint from them or even refer to them in the studio. But as you say, you come home and there's some things that for some reason they stick with you. And even going back, I've been back to the same location in County Mayo, Ireland, for 4 years, and I still come away with something different every time that impacts me. And so the memory aspect is really important, because that's where the emotion comes in, and the kind of the gut feeling that I had in certain places, and that's what guides the abstract aspects of my work.
So how do you take all that and start a painting from it? Are you looking at your photographs? Or are you looking at sketches?
No, neither. No, it's process-oriented work. Images or compositions are coming out of the process of building up these layers. It's a little hard to describe, but there's a point as I'm working with color and texture and so forth where I start to see where it's going. And I don't even have to consciously push it to be, say, about something in Ireland. It just comes through. And it seems very subconscious or intuitive. And so I've just kind of learned that over time, that I don't have to push it. It's gonna come through. And that I don't refer to any other visuals in the studio. Now, sometimes I will say I do small work when I'm overseas, and sometimes those do. And there was a particular series that came out of some monotypes that I did in Ireland. And it was something about the shape that was happening there, and it really brought me to a different place in my painting to try to work with bold shapes, which I really hadn't done before. So there's a crossover of media and things like that, but never just looking at a photograph.
What different types of media do you use?
I use a lot of water-based media, especially when I travel, and that would be water-soluble graphite and pencils, and I use chalks. I use a little bit of egg tempera, some acrylic, some gouache, casein. I treat them all kind of like I do the oil and cold wax. I mean, I layer them and I scrape them and I put them on with basically the same tools, but there's a different effects. And then I also really enjoy printmaking, monotype, and I have a etching press in my studio now, and I have been working with exploring carborundum printing.
What's that?
That carborundum is a grit. It's a iron oxide grit, I believe, and it's something used in lithography, but you can get it in bulk, and you make a plate by, oh, believe me, I'm such a beginner here, but the basic idea is that you create a plate by fixing this grit onto the plate with an adhesive. So I either use acrylic gel medium or some other type of glue, and then you roll your ink over that, and then you print it. So it makes these beautiful textures, and wherever the grit is, the ink is very dark. It's picked up by the grit. So I had this idea for a series in which I would do these carborundum. Well, I thought first just straight out monotype, and then I discovered that carborundum prints would work better because there's more texture there. Anyway, the idea was to create these prints and then paint over them with thin layers of cold wax, medium, and oil, and to have the print and the paint interact on the surface. So I'm not covering up the print, I'm working with it. And that's been a really interesting thing I'm doing right now.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, and the making monotypes is just like endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
So I really love that. And I'm home more this summer than I've been for a number of years. I'm just having a nice long stretch of time in the studio to do this printmaking. It's been in the back of my mind for quite a while. I got the press a few years ago, and I'm just really enjoying it.
It sounds like it's your playtime.
It is. Yes. I really need that. As much as I love teaching, I also need to be home in the studio. It's important.
It is. I think it's critical, and it's so easily overlooked that sometimes we just need time that we create that's only for ourselves and to do whatever comes to mind and not have an agenda. Right.
Or just have time to look at those projects that have been percolating somewhere in the back of your mind that would, take a little focus to work out how to do it. I mean, the first time I started making these carborundum things, they were terrible, so it was like, it took a few times to figure out what I was doing, and then a few times to figure out how to put paint on the top and all that. So it's just like learning something.
Yeah.
So it's great. I love it.
Yeah, I love it it sounds like you are the type of person that will often put yourself in the beginner's phase.
Yeah, I think it's important. It really is. I think especially for people that teach, you're constantly dealing with people that it's all new to them, whatever you're telling them. And if you forget that, and it is easy to forget what it's like to be faced with something that you're not really sure what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really good for anyone who teaches at any level to do that sometimes.
Yeah, to remember what it's like when you don't know what you're doing and you're feeling insecure about it and you're feeling like, what am I doing here? I'm never right. Be that good.
And that idea of what am I doing? I just feel like I'm making a mess, is so common. And when I teach introduction to cold wax, and I'm like, yeah, hang in there. It'll get better.
I love it. So last question, what advice would you give to yourself, the artist that you were 10 years ago?
I think that I would tell myself to aim high and to believe that I could really have a career. And I think even 10 years ago, it wasn't all that clear to me that I could actually make a living at this and it could be a full-time income. And, it's not all about income, but at the same time, that level of professionalism puts you in a certain mindset where you're very focused, you're very dedicated, and I think that it took a long time to get to that point where I could believe that was going to happen. And so if I could say that to my younger self, I think it probably would have avoided some angst, but maybe you have to go through that anyway.
Yeah, I think there is a switch that happens where you're maybe not taking, there's that part of you that's doubting that you're going to be able to do this. And that part that doubts you is holding you back from that. So yeah, it's a big issue.
To some extent, yeah. I mean, you have to have the guts, whatever, to put yourself out there and approach people about things and galleries and all that. And it's still not easy. None of it is particularly easy, but I guess seeing that it can have good results is really reinforcing.
Yeah, and the validation that comes from, I mean, I think that's something that it's difficult for artists to talk about, or it's not that it's difficult to talk about. I think that we have such conflicting emotions about selling our work. But the truth is there's a lot of validation that comes from that.
Oh, there is. And I always feel good that it's out there, and I feel good that somebody else is seeing it.
And enjoying it.
Yeah. I mean, I really appreciate that. And it does validate. It's not the only validation, but it does help. Right.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I've very much enjoyed this conversation and I've learned a lot.
Oh, good. Well, I really enjoyed it too. Thank you.
Once again, a big thank you to Rebecca for taking the time out to talk with me. Go to savvypainter.com to see her work, connect with her on social media, and of course, if you are interested in the book that she and Jerry McLaughlin co-authored, you still have time to catch their Indiegogo campaign for cold wax medium techniques, concepts, and conversations. You have until August 17th, 2016. I also want to mention that if crowdfunding intrigues you, I made a cheat sheet for you. It's my own checklist that I came up with when I was working on my project, A Portrait of Argentina, and it has all the things that I think you really, really need to have in order to have a successful crowdfunding campaign. So you can download that or any of the free guides at savvypainter.com. Now, for a moment of gratitude, I want to send a big thank you to Sharon Guy, Glennis Allen, Renee Bates, Gaela Irwing, Alice Grunt, and Karen O'Connell. And also, while I'm at it, thank you to Guars, J. Drakes 55, and Soup Stewart Sophie, Duccio 24, Donna M., Socially Sorted, and Painted Leaf Landscapes for leaving reviews on iTunes. Those reviews help other artists find the podcast, and they help me get great guests like the one I had today. Until next week, this is Antrese Wood with the Savvy Painter Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.